Good evening and welcome to the Frola Community Expert Meetup. We have the wonderful Rebecca O'Reilly, and she's a holistic nutritionist, and it's really all about this evening about how you can use food as medicine to manage your chronic illnesses. So I will pass you over without further ado to Rebecca, and I'll wait in the back line. If anyone has any questions, I will ask them as we go along. Thank you, Rebecca. Over to
Thank you, Susanna. I'm just going to share my screen with everybody. Good evening, everybody. It's lovely to be here. And I just have a little presentation for this evening. So we will get that up on the screen. Can everybody see that? Can you see that, Susanna? Yeah, great. Lovely. So tonight, I'm Rebecca O'Reilly. As Susanna mentioned, I'm a holistic nutritionist and naturopath. And really the focus of my work is helping people to overcome what we call chronic and mystery illness. And I'll go into that a little bit more. And I really empower people to become their own healers, and doing that using food as medicine. So let's have a little look. So the main things I help with, as I said, are chronic and mystery illness. And chronic and mystery illness is really a sort of broad umbrella term. We're living in a world where we are absolutely inundated with all sorts of conditions and symptoms that are very poorly misunderstood in the medical world. So that's what I mean by the word mystery, because a lot of these things that we're seeing in the world today are very poorly understood. And they're chronic, which means that they're ongoing, they're persistent, they're hard to get rid of. So I help people understand what's going on in the body, why they're experiencing these things. And a lot of this has to do with pathogens. Pathogens are viruses, bacteria, parasites, for example, all the little bugs, the critters that we can get exposed to, alongside environmental toxins. So things like heavy metals, radiation, herbicides and pesticides, solvents, plastics. All of these things that we get bombarded with on a daily basis have a huge, huge impact on our health. And that, in combination with pathogenic load in the body, creates an environment where illness can easily arise. So we're going to go into all of this in a little bit more detail so you can get a full grasp of what I'm talking about. And so, as I said, I help people to really become their own healer, reconnect with their body and create vibrant health. So some of the conditions I can help with are the autoimmune diseases, chronic fatigue syndrome, adrenal fatigue, fibromyalgia, things like SIBO and IBS, which are gut conditions. So that's small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and irritable bowel syndrome, super, super common gut conditions that we're seeing today. Some of the skin conditions like acne, psoriasis, eczema, reproductive disorders, PCOS, fibroids, endometriosis, and UTIs, which are so, so common in women. The amount of women who have very, very chronic UTIs is really phenomenal. And the saddest thing of all is that we normalize these things. You know, it's really normal for women to walk around with PCOS and, you know, brush it under the carpet. PCOS is polycystic ovarian syndrome, for those of you who are unfamiliar with the terminology. But there's nothing normal about any of these conditions. You know, it's not normal to be in poor health. But in the world that we're living in today, it's become the norm. So we really need to learn that it's not normal, and understand better how we can address this. So part one, what you need to know. So the first thing you need to know is what we're up against. And I spoke a little bit about that just in my intro slide. We're talking about pathogens, viruses and bacteria predominantly, and toxins. The second thing you need to understand is how to build a strong immune system, because it's your immune system that ultimately is going to ward off what's coming in from the outside and keep you strong. And then the third aspect is to really support the organs of detoxification, in particular the liver. So between the immune system and the liver, this is really the sort of the crux of your health, if you like. These are the two aspects of your health that you really need to have working in optimal order in order to create a good quality of life and strong health. So the four main aspects of what we're up against include viruses, heavy metals, radiation, herbicides, pesticides, fungicides, and DDT. And these four elements on their own can be viewed as the root causes of chronic conditions. So even though I described, in my practice, I'm working with a very broad range of conditions, the reason I'm able to do that is because when you boil it down, what those conditions come down to is ultimately pathogenic load and toxicity in the body. So when we start to clear out the pathogenic load and the toxicity, we start to create a more harmonious internal terrain. So even though all of these conditions and people's individual symptoms and, everything that might be going on with somebody's health compared to the next person is very different and it all seems very complicated, it's not so complicated when we understand what's happening at the root. It's just that the way in which one individual compared to the next will express a condition or set of symptoms is different because their particular concoction of what's going on in the body is different. So one person might have two particular strains of viral load and a particular set of toxins. Another person might have two other strains of viral load and another set of toxins. And that's what creates the differentiation ultimately between one condition and another, one person's set of symptoms and another. We're also living in a very adrenaline-based culture. Our modern life is very, very stressful for the human body. Everything is very fast-paced. We're on technology a lot of the time. We're highly exposed to radiation, which has a very negative effect on our electrical system. We are ultimately electrical beings, and our energy circuits become very incoherent when we're exposed to a lot of radiation, because that electrical force that we're up against is almost counter to what our electrical system is doing. So it creates this incoherence that can create a lot of problems. It can create a lot of scatteredness in the mind, but it can also create sickness. And then our diets, our diets are on the whole not very helpful for healing or for staying well or for being in optimal health. So, for example, things like eggs, dairy, gluten, these foods in particular, corn, soy, these foods feed viruses and bacteria in the body. So wherever there is a viral or bacterial condition, we need to get rid of these foods for a period of time, if not forever, in order to really bring the body back into balance. And that's just a reality we face, unfortunately. And people don't like to hear this part because the hardest thing to do of all is to change your diet. And then things like coffee and alcohol are very, very, very aggressive in the body. So the liver has a hard time dealing with these things. And then we're eating very, very high fat, high protein diets, which is also a big burden on the liver. It's very difficult for the body to clear out and create a more harmonious and clean space within itself when there's high fats and high proteins coming in, because the liver is always up against it, having to process these things. So the sort of takeaway message from here is that all microorganisms need to feed in order to live. They are like us. They eat food and they excrete waste just like we do. And the foods they love to feed on are eggs, dairy, and gluten being the top three. So how do we build a strong immune system? Well, the first thing we need to do is optimize this inner terrain that I've been speaking about. And the way that we can optimize the inner terrain is by engaging in daily cleansing techniques, simple techniques. I'm not talking about doing a hardcore 3-week detox or cleanse, which can also be helpful to do periodically. But day to day, we also need to be doing this deeper cleaning work, but in a gentle and more consistent way. We also need to nurture the gut. The gut is really the foundation. You know, this is the place to start with your health. If there's things going on in the body, then we do need to look at the gut to see what's happening. And don't forget that the liver is part of the gut. So the liver is like our master organ. If it's not functioning properly, the whole body is not functioning properly. And then the third part to building a strong immune system is to know your foods. So know what foods are a hindrance. If you know what's going on in your body, then you can start to understand what foods are going to be a hindrance and what foods are going to be a help. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more. So optimizing the organs of detoxification through daily cleansing techniques. The first thing we need to understand here is about lowering our fats. In the health world today, there's this explosion of interest towards a high-fat, high-protein diet. And a high-fat, high-protein diet can be helpful in the shorter term, mostly because people are cutting out all the processed foods that go alongside. And unfortunately, in the longer term, what happens is a high-fat, high-protein diet puts a huge amount of pressure on the liver. So the more fat coming in, we can put high fat and high protein under the same umbrella, because all the high protein foods, we're really talking about animal food, we're talking about dairy, we're also talking about nuts and seeds in the plant world. These high protein foods are also very high in fat. Even a lean piece of chicken or a piece of fish is still high in fat. And that's not to say you don't eat them. It's to say that you eat small amounts of them, and possibly later in the day. So the higher the amount of fat coming into the body, the more work there is for the liver and the heart. The higher the fat content in the body, the less oxygen there is in the blood. And oxygen is needed to pump the blood around the body. It's also needed to reduce pathogens from proliferating or replicating and exploding and causing more problems. So choosing healthy fats is optimal in small amounts: avocado, coconut, nuts and seeds, for example, small amounts of really good quality animal food if you're an animal food eater. And avoiding all fats before 12 noon can really help to optimize your liver function. If you focus on fruits and greens in the morning, then you're maximizing the amount of time that the liver has to do that deeper work. So if you can imagine your liver has been working really hard all night to gather up all the junk. Your liver kicks into gear at about 2 in the morning, and it works through the night to gather up all the waste. And in the morning, it really needs space and time to flush all that through. This is the time when it can really do that deeper cleaning work. As soon as you put fats or proteins into the body, and I'm talking about, more dense proteins, more dense, like animal food, like dairy, like eggs, like nuts, like seeds, for example. These are what we would call the more dense proteins. As soon as they go in, your liver has to produce bile in order to break these down. And so your liver's attention gets diverted, and it can no longer do that deeper cleaning work to the same extent. Even though your liver is always detoxing, because that's the role of the liver, in order to really get in underneath the deeper stuff, it needs that space and time. So the second part of this is increasing your fruit and vegetable intake. Fruit, veg, herbs and spices, and wild foods. These are what we call the healing foods. And even though, we know eat your 5 fruit and veg, 5 a day or even 10 a day, we still fall down in this area. We're still not really optimizing what we could be taking in terms of fruits and vegetables, and sort of emphasizing and focusing on the importance of them. It's absolutely critical for building your immune system, and also keeping the organs of detoxification in good shape. So let's just have a little look at the healing foods. Any questions so far? Anybody have anything to ask just based on what I've said so. It's a lot of information I appreciate, but if anyone has any confusions they'd like to get clarity on, then please speak up, and then we can address some more questions at the end. Nothing for now. No hands up, Susanna, just in case I'm missing any. Okay, great. Well, let's move on and have a little look at the healing foods then. So when I talk about the healing foods, I'm talking about fruits, vegetables, herbs and spices, and wild foods. And these foods really are nature's gift to us. These foods contain a deep intelligence that's way beyond the intelligence of the human mind. So these are really the foods that bolster the immune system, combat harmful viruses and bacteria, eliminate toxins, and they contain not only the capacity to help us to heal on a physical level, they also contain emotional and spiritual gifts. So connecting with these foods and understanding what gifts they have to bring really helps to shift our health on a deeper level. So fruits, for example, which people can often fear because of the sugar content, but we can't compare the sugar content of fruit to refined sugar, for example. It's a completely different thing. Here we're talking about a whole food that is packed with vitamins and minerals and antioxidants and phytochemicals. So that fructose and glucose that's contained within fruit is surrounded by all of these nutrients. And when that's taken into the body knows exactly what to do with it. So it's a very different thing from having table sugar in isolation, for example, which has been stripped of its nutrients. And not only that, it's important to keep in mind that fruit is also highly antiviral, highly antibacterial. So for example, when it comes to candida, which is a fungal infection, which can be vaginal, it can also be in the gut. Often people are put on a no to low fruit diet, which is actually completely counter to what the body needs. The same goes when there's UTIs, for example. People are often told to eat a very low sugar diet, including fruit, which is completely incorrect if we look at the properties of fruit and what it can actually do. So fruit is one of the most detoxing and healing foods that we have access to on the planet today. It's one of the highest sources of vitamin C. It contains this precious glucose and fructose that really fuels the body. So our body runs on glucose. We have to keep that in mind. The body doesn't run on fats and proteins. Even though small amounts of fats and proteins are important, the most important fuel for our body is glucose. So fruit is packed with antioxidants, phytochemicals, minerals, vitamins, and essential nutrients, as I mentioned. So let's just have a little look at some of the individual fruits and vegetables and why they're helpful. So apples, for example, are highly anti-inflammatory, especially in the brain. So any nervous system or brain conditions, eating a plentiful amount of apples is super helpful. The phytochemicals that are contained within the apples really help to feed the neurons, which are the main unit of the brain and the nervous system, and feed the electrical activity. So as I mentioned before, we're electrical beings. We run on electricity. So we need to have the foods and the fuel in order to help that electricity run. Apples are also amazing colon cleansers and liver healers. So the pectin, the high pectin content that's contained within the apple moves through the gut and helps to sweep out bacteria and viruses, yeast, mold, fungus, etc. They're deeply hydrating, providing precious mineral salts and electrolytes. And on an emotional level, they really help us to change the energy around us to bring in brighter and happier things. So in order to get this benefit from apples, it's really important to be aiming for 3 a day. So that could be eaten or that could be juiced, could be cooked. You could have stewed apples, you could have apple in your soup, you could have apple in your juice, you could have apple in your smoothie, for example, or you could just eat an apple raw. And then bananas. So bananas are really one of those foods where there's a lot of sort of fear mongering, if you like, as to, you know, the sugar content. It might not be helpful, eat less bananas, where actually bananas are one of the most powerful antiviral fruits that exist. and they're really, really powerful for removing any kind of fungus from the body. So when it comes to reversing gut disorders like IBS, Candida, SIBO, colitis, for example, bananas will really be your number one. They help to soothe sleep disorders and create calm throughout the whole gut because they're very high in tryptophan. Tryptophan is an amino acid that really helps the body to create a calmness, a sense of calmness. They're a very powerful exercise food. So if you're going to have a workout or you're just finished a workout, then bananas are a really wonderful food to bring in, bananas and dates. And on an emotional level, they help us to peel back our layers to reveal who we truly are. So when I was healing, so I've had a big health journey, and since I was young, really, my health, you know, was I had chronic asthma as a child, and I used to pick up a lot of viruses and bacteria. I was, you know, a lot going on. And even though I grew out of that as a teenager, when I was in my early 20s, I got very sick again and started experiencing all sorts of chronic symptoms, from gut symptoms to reproductive issues, headaches, chronic anxiety, you name it, I had it. And the doctors were totally baffled. They just did not understand what was going on. And I was actually put on HRT in my early 20s, and it was totally detrimental to my well-being. And it was at that point that I decided no more doctors, no more tests. And, you know, I felt that I was just being brought down the wrong path with the medical system. And that's not to say that I negate the medical system at all. I don't. It's very important that we're working holistically. But what was being suggested to me at that time made no sense to me. And I felt that I was being pulled in the wrong direction. And that was my turning point. I really decided at that point in my life that I was going to find my own way to heal and to do it naturally using food. And that took me on a very, very deep journey, not only physically, but also emotionally and spiritually, and required me to do a lot of deep inner work. But I can tell you that one of the main things that finally got me through with all the gut stuff I had going on was bananas. So they were one of the biggest healing allies. You know, they are one of the biggest healing allies. And to this day, I eat a lot of bananas, a lot. So I can vouch for them, you know, from my own experience. And this information, you know, it wasn't until much later in my 30s that I actually came across the work of Anthony William, also known as the medical medium, who's become much more well known since I first came across him in 2015 or 16. And when I came across Anthony's work, I knew with every single cell in my body that this is what was going to take me to the next stage of healing. Because he was teaching us why we're seeing what we're seeing in the world today, what I've explained in terms of viruses and bacteria and toxicity, and how this is creating the conditions and symptoms that we're seeing. But not only that, he was also teaching, and still to this day is teaching, how we can truly, truly use food as medicine to heal the body. And it goes deeper than that, because it's connecting us on an emotional and spiritual level in a much more profound way. So that's just a little bit of insight as to my background and my experience with it all. So vegetables, good old vegetables. So all foods that fall under this category are absolutely essential for our health and well-being. And the main reason for that is because they contain mineral salts and trace minerals that the body requires in order to function. So the body runs on glucose and mineral salts. Those are the primary fuels of the body. So as I said, this electrical being that we are, this electrical system that goes on within the brain and nervous system, it requires these mineral salts and trace minerals in order for it to create what it needs in order to function, like neurotransmitters, for example, which are the chemical messengers in the brain nervous system, in the body. So, for example, the family of leafy greens are absolutely amazing for providing what we need to function, especially for this, as I've mentioned several times, the electricity that runs around the nervous system. But not only that, these trace minerals, when they go into the body, when they enter the bloodstream, they go to the brain where they connect with the soul, and they connect not only with the soul, but also with the beyond. So they're very, very important for not only our physical function, but also for our connection to source. So they almost get activated in the bloodstream, and they know exactly where they need to go because they are connected beyond us. So it's important to keep that in mind with food. You know, we're not just operating on physical realms here, we're operating on all realms. And this is one of the beauties of understanding food in this way, is that when we can connect with that knowledge, with that truth, it helps us to heal in a much deeper way. So on an emotional level, leafy greens really help us to forge a way forward and get unstuck, not only physically, but also emotionally. And another important vegetable that I want to mention are potatoes, because they're also a little bit like bananas. You know, they're said to be very disruptive for our blood sugar. You know, they're a carbohydrate. They'll cause you to put on weight. Well, all of this is very, very misunderstood, for want of a better word, because potatoes are actually, of all the vegetables, they draw up from the earth some of the highest concentrations of nutrients. They're also very, very high in lysine, which is an amino acid that acts against viruses in the body. So where there's any viral condition, bringing in ample potatoes is very, very important. But how we eat potatoes is critical. If you smother your potatoes in cheese, for example, then that's not going to be helpful, because the cheese is going to feed an underlying condition. If you smother your potatoes in a lot of fats, then it blocks the uptake of the glucose into the cells. So potatoes have this vital glucose. The body is always looking for glucose, but if we have too many fats coming in, it blocks the uptake of that glucose into the cells. So it's important to keep that in mind. So when we eat potatoes correctly, if we eat them baked or steamed, for example, even mashed without the butter, you could use a little bit of avocado instead, then potatoes are very, very healing and really help to stabilize our blood sugar. They are also antiviral. So any viral condition like chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, the herpes viruses in general, potatoes are really helpful. And when I talk about viruses, you know, this is an interesting one, because this has only really sort of come on people's radar since COVID. And for those of us who've been in the world of viruses for a long time and been dealing with health conditions and now understand it to be coming from a viral source, you know, COVID was just another thing coming along, you know. But actually the sort of the family of viruses that are the most problematic, that act behind the scenes, are the herpes viruses like Epstein-Barr virus, shingles, herpes simplex 1 and 2, HHV6, cytomegalovirus. These are all viruses that sit under the herpes umbrella. And the most problematic of the herpes strains is Epstein-Barr virus. And one of the reasons why COVID hit people so badly, for example, is because it was flaring up underlying Epstein-Barr virus strains, viral strains that they carried without even knowing. So just a little bit of insight into the viral world, which is helpful to understand. So herbs and spices don't just add flavor to our meals. They also have healing powers that help to transform your health. So even just a little sprinkle of herbs every day can go a long way. We're making teas, for example. So coriander is the go-to herb for heavy metal detoxification. It's a very, very potent liver detoxifier. It supports the adrenal glands. It helps to balance blood sugar, helps to eliminate worms in the gut, and it's also antiviral and antibacterial. On an emotional level, coriander helps to bring clarity and helps us to find our path. And then the aromatic herbs like rosemary, sage, thyme, oregano, for example, these herbs are absolutely incredible for fighting streptococcus bacteria. So strep bacteria is very problematic in our world because we've become so antibiotic resistant to strep. And strep causes things like UTIs, for example. It also causes acne. It can cause sore throats. It can cause eye infections like styes. So lots and lots of these common everyday things are caused by strep. It also causes a lot of problems in the gut. So for people who have IBS or SIBO, for example, there will be very high levels of strep in the gut. And these aromatic herbs help to get right in there and start knocking back, killing off streptococcus bacteria. Wild foods. So wild foods, when I talk about wild foods, you know, it could be nettles, it could be dandelion, for example, which is just starting to come through now that we're coming into spring. All the wild garlic will be starting to come through, wild blueberries, berries that you find in the wild. So all of these, we have so much food that we can look towards for health purposes in the wild if we just know how. And these foods are adaptogens, meaning that they help us to manage stress and adapt to what life throws our way. So they really do contain critical survival information. And because they're living in the wild, because they grow in the wild, they have this resilience that we then imbibe when we take them in. So they really help to keep our immune system strong and to keep us balanced. So wild blueberries, I mentioned, wild blueberries are probably one of the most powerful foods on the planet today. They have survived and adapted to every single climate fluctuation over thousands of years. And it's almost like the harsher the environment, the more these berries thrive. They have this innate resilience and ability to adapt in every situation. And when we eat them, that's exactly what we take in. So in this country, we don't find a lot of wild blueberries. I have been told that they exist in Wales. Susanna, you'll like to hear that, but
news.
Yeah, it's good news. On the whole, they come from the sort of more northern parts of Europe, Scandinavian countries, and also from the States and Canada. So in this country, we mostly get them frozen. We can buy them in the health food shop frozen or as powder. And they really are a miracle food on so many different levels, and they taste amazing. They're very, very high in antioxidants. And they are absolutely critical for removing heavy metals from the body, which I will go on to speak about in a further slide. So nettles grow everywhere. We're definitely not short of them. We have them growing all around us, even in the city. And spring is a beautiful time of year for picking nettles because they're at their sweetest. This is when they're young and the new growth is coming through. And these are really the sort of ultimate reproductive healers, if you like. So in women, they help enhance egg production and help the body get rid of toxic estrogens, which is really important because those toxic estrogens create problems, all sorts of problems, contributing to things like PCOS, endometriosis, fibroids, for example. Nettles are also very rich in silica, which helps to build and protect the bone. They're a natural pain reliever, and they absorb and pull radiation from the body. They also help us to get very centered. So when the mind becomes scattered and we're feeling all over the place, a cup of nettle tea or taking some nettle tincture can be really helpful for just bringing us back to our center. And raw honey. So raw honey is different to regular honey that you buy in the supermarket, because what you buy in the supermarket has generally been heat processed. It's been pasteurized. So then honey loses its medicinal qualities because honey is very rich in all sorts of live enzymes that need to be kept below a certain temperature in order to be kept alive, if you like. And honey is a very ancient medicine. I'm talking about raw honey, so raw or unprocessed honey that hasn't been heat treated, that you would get from your farmer's market, or if you know a local beekeeper, for example, that's the place to pick up raw honey. And honey is really another adaptogenic food, a bit like wild blueberries and nettle, for example. And it's produced by bees, which are one of the most adaptogenic creatures on the planet. They really can adapt so well to what's going on in the world, but they're up against it. You know, the poor bees have had a hard time, and they're living in a world which is, you know, almost fighting them to death in a way. As we are with a lot of our animals and insects, because of what we're doing to the world, because of what man is doing to the world. So honey really helps to feed the body and soul. It helps to strengthen the white blood cells. It contains over 200,000 phytochemicals. It's very high in minerals. It protects us from radiation. It's highly anti-cancerous. It's a very, very powerful brain food. And on an emotional level, it really lights us up and feeds the soul. You know, if you have a teaspoon of raw honey, your whole being comes to life. Well, mine does anyway. You know, I just feel this injection of energy and warmth and lightness and inspiration come into my body. So at the first sign of sickness, it's really, really great to take a teaspoon of raw honey before you go to bed. So let's have a look at some healing protocols that are useful to put into practice in everyday life. And the first one is lemon water with raw honey. And this might sound really simple. Some of you may already be having lemon water when you wake up in the morning. But the reason why it's so powerful is because it helps to, as I spoke about before, your liver's been working hard all night to gather up all the waste, and in the morning it needs to flush that through. And lemon water ignites that process. So it gets the liver moving, getting all this stuff moving out. It has a flushing mechanism. And adding raw honey to the lemon helps to activate it even further. It helps to provide fuel that your liver needs in order to do this deeper detoxification work. Lemons are also an incredible source of vitamin C and calcium, and they're also deeply calming. So this is a lovely tonic that you can have not only in the morning, but also before you go to bed. And the recipe is here on the right-hand side if you want to take a little snapshot of that. It's really important not to have hot water and lemon, because the hot water will ruin the properties of the lemon and also the raw honey if you're adding it. So I tend to have a jar like this. This is a Kilner jar, which is about 900 mils. So it's just shy of a litre. And I squeeze one whole lemon and I fill my jar up with sort of 3/4 of cold filtered water. And I squeeze my lemon in, and I have a nice big dollop of raw honey. And then I add a little bit of boiling water at the top just to make it lukewarm. And that's the best way to make your lemon drink in the morning. You can also drink it cold. You don't have to add any hot water, but I find just having it off cold, lukewarm, just helps to settle my stomach in the morning. I find it a little bit harsh using just cold water. Another amazing tonic is celery juice. So celery is, sorry, I've just lost my picture of you all. So celery, when you juice it, is a herbal medicine. It's also, along with potatoes, bananas, wild blueberries, nettles, an extremely powerful healing food. So any kind of gut condition going on in the body, celery juice is number one. It has the capacity to turn gut conditions around very, very quickly. It's highly, highly antiviral. And one of the reasons for that is because of the sodium cluster salts that it contains. So those sodium cluster salts act as an antiseptic in the body, helping to pull apart the membranes that sit around a virus or bacteria. So by pulling apart those membranes, it exposes the virus or bacteria to the immune system for dealing with, for moving out. The reason it's helpful for gut conditions is because it builds hydrochloric acid in the stomach, which helps you to break down proteins and also protects you from picking up more bugs. And it helps to build up our bile levels in the liver, which help you to break down fats. In the modern world, people are very low in both HCl and bile. And this is one of the reasons why we're seeing so many gut conditions today. Because if there's low HCl and low bile, we're not breaking down our foods properly. If we're not breaking down foods properly and the liver is already overburdened from too much of the wrong things coming in, then food is sitting around in the gut and it's rotting. And this creates an environment where bacteria can thrive, where viruses can thrive. And this is the beginning of the beginning of a gut condition. So really, we're talking about the health of the liver here. The health of the liver is absolutely key in this. Celery also contains a unique vitamin C that's readily usable for the body. So it doesn't have to be methylated or processed in any way in order for it to be used. Celery juice detoxes the liver and the lymph, it feeds the brain, and it supports the adrenals. So any kind of adrenal problems or blood sugar imbalances, for example, celery juice is absolutely brilliant. So I suggest drinking 400 mils every morning on an empty stomach. And doing this in the long term. So I've been doing this for every day for the last four years or so. In the morning, I start with my lemon water and raw honey, and then I have my celery juice. And what that has done to my health is just unspeakable. It's really, really a most beautiful food. And on an emotional level, it helps us to flush fear from the gut. Harboring fear in the gut also has a huge, huge impact on our gut health, on gut conditions. So we're not ever just looking at the physical, we're always looking at the emotional. What's going on in that person's life? Have they experienced trauma? Is there PTSD? Is there chronic stress? What's happening day to day with a person's emotional makeup? So a powerful morning routine to start putting into place for any of you who are suffering with conditions. This is where I start with all my clients. So anybody who comes to see me would be set up on this protocol first and foremost, because this is the beginning of starting to turn things around. By implementing this strategy, you're giving the liver a maximum amount of time between the time you wake up and lunchtime to really do this deeper work. And if you are suffering from a condition, giving the body that time to do the deeper work is absolutely critical. Otherwise, your body is just doing the surface stuff all the time, and it can never get in under the condition to turn it around. So lemon water with raw honey, followed by celery juice, followed by the heavy metal detox smoothie. So many of these ingredients I've already spoken, or some of these ingredients I've spoken about. But there's 5 key ingredients that are absolutely critical for removing heavy metals from the body. Not bananas, wild blueberries, coriander, dulse, barley grass juice powder, and spirulina. And we mix those 5 ingredients with bananas and orange to make a really delicious smoothie. So when those 5 ingredients go into the body, they literally move, they sit from the brain right down to the anus, and they start picking up heavy metals inside the system, inside the brain, inside the nervous system, in the organs, and they pass those heavy metals from one to the next to move them out of the body. So heavy metals are, as I explained in one of the first slides, one of the 4 root causes of chronic conditions. And we're exposed to them everywhere. We're exposed to them in our rainwater, in our water systems, in our food from herbicides and pesticides, in our pots and pans, in medications, for example, in any medical treatments. All have heavy metals in small amounts, but they have an accumulative effect. So when I talk about heavy metals, I'm talking about things like lead, aluminium, mercury, copper, common things that you will have heard about, but you would never necessarily know that you're picking them up on a daily basis. And these are heavy metals are inherently naturally occurring elements in the environment, but when they get used by industry, they become forged or changed in some way, making them highly toxic to the human body. And they can also be passed down from one generation to the next. So they can be very deep inside somebody's body. Like a child can be born into this world with a very high level of heavy metals. So a child that is born into the world with eczema, for example, or has eczema developed very, very young in life, this is because they have a high level of metals in the liver alongside a virus. And that virus is feeding on those metals and spurting out what we call dermatoxins to the skin, creating that eczema or that rash. Heavy metals on their own, without any viral condition, can also cause a lot of problems. They are at the root of things like anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder, Alzheimer's, autism, any of the more sort of mental health conditions, for example. So it's important to keep in mind the level at which these tiny accumulations can cause a detrimental effect. So the trick is to be getting rid of them on a continuous basis. We are exposed, and that's the reality. But if we know how to keep on top of getting rid of them and know how to remove the deeper layers by bringing in cleansing in daily life, then we can start to get in under some of these things in a gentle way, doing it every day. So you can read more about that morning cleanse and in full details. There's an ebook on my, a download on my website where you can read more about that if you're interested. So some of the things to take away from what I've spoken about today is really understand what we're up against. For those of you who are suffering with any kind of condition, this is absolutely critical to know that viruses, heavy metals, radiation, herbicides, and pesticides are having a huge impact on our health. And when I talk about viruses, I'm talking about predominantly the herpes family. Prioritize you as a single parent. If you're not okay, your family's not okay. Well, as a single parent or as a couple, you have to prioritize your health in order to be able to look after your family. And using food to prioritize your health is one of the most powerful ways of turning things around. Learn what it means to use food as medicine in daily life and take action accordingly, just with baby steps. Incorporate a daily morning cleanse, the morning routine. Appreciate just how hard your body works for you and give it a break. We bombard our bodies every single day with the wrong things. I also run a cleanse twice a year, a 21-day cleanse, which really teaches you how to put these protocols into place. That starts on the 1st of March. So if anyone's interested in that, you can find out more about it and register on my website. The link is there. The doors to that will close this Friday. So if that is something that you're interested in, please do reach out. And that can be a really wonderful way of taking baby steps to creating more consistency in your life, really learning how to put food into place in a different way. And this is not just for you if you're sick or you have symptoms. This then travels out to your family. This is also about looking after your children. The children of our world today need to know this information because they're up against it even more than our generation. So I hope that's been helpful. I'll just end by saying your health is everything. Without your health, you are stuck, and the progress that can be made in other areas of life becomes so much more difficult. So I'll stop sharing and take any questions. It would be lovely to hear from any of you who have questions on any of that. I appreciate it was a bit of a whistle-stop tour, and there's a lot of information in there that can be slightly overwhelming, and but just I hope you've taken something away from it, and I hope it's been helpful.
Oh, absolutely, Rebecca. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so very much. We do have some questions in the chat, so I'll read them out if that's okay with you.
Yeah, sure. Feel free to just say, Susanna, feel free, anybody who wants to jump on and jump on and face to face, please feel free to do so. But if you're happy with your cameras off, that's fine too.
Okay, so Anyone going to jump on Carl's first? Probably not. Okay, so curious, as a Crohn's IBS sufferer, what are the worst foods to try to avoid to keep the gut stable?
A Crohn's and IBS sufferer, yeah. So again, we're back to looking at the underlying sort of pathogenic activity that's going on in the gut. So really, the top foods to avoid are gluten, dairy, and eggs, because these will feed the underlying condition. It'll be very, very difficult to turn around either Crohn's or IBS as long as those foods are coming in. The top 5 foods would be gluten, dairy, eggs, soy, and corn. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. One for Richard, from Richard. To lose weight, people talk about cutting down on carbs. To stay healthy, you're talking about cutting down fats and proteins. I've got a low calcium levels in basically everything I eat, dairy, eggs, fish, and nuts. You said should be reduced. So my calcium level is stable, but I'd love to lose a few kilos.
Yeah, great question, Richard. Great question. So low calcium levels in the body tend to come from a state of acidity. And the things that create acidity in the body are pathogenic load, but also the foods that we're eating. So all of those foods that you've mentioned there are more acidic foods. So the more of those foods you have coming in, the higher the acidity will be in the body and the more calcium you'll actually lose. So it's a bit of a vicious cycle. You know, we get our calcium, in actual fact, the most bioavailable calcium we get from lemons and we get from greens. And nuts and seeds in small amounts is absolutely fine. And small amounts of animal food is fine, but small amounts. You know, in order to turn around an acidic condition, we need to be bringing in more alkaline foods, which is more fruits and vegetables. So when it comes to weight issues, if there's an ongoing struggle with the weight, this really comes down to the liver. When the liver is overburdened, when it's struggling, when it's slowing down, then weight becomes a problem. When we start freeing up the liver over time by reducing the load, by reducing the fats and proteins, which create a heavy load, then the liver starts to unburden and it can actually start to function properly, which means that the body can then lose that excess weight. There's 2 approaches to health in general. There's the high carbohydrate, low fat approach, or there's the high protein, high fat, low carb approach. And in the health world today, the approach that's being advocated is a high protein, high fat approach, because it can turn things around quickly in the shorter term. So if somebody eats a high fat, high protein diet with very low carbohydrate for, a short period of time, they can lose weight quickly. Their blood sugar on the surface, the figures can stabilize. But in the longer term, what that's doing to the body is not helpful, because it's slowing down the liver. It'll cause weight gain down the line. Whereas a high carbohydrate, low fat approach is actually what's supporting the body and supporting longer term health. So even though it might be a slower fix, it's actually supporting longer term health. It'll support you down the road. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that answers your question.
And then from T, I live with fibromyalgia and IBS, and I found the FODMAP plan does help, but that means that I'm really limited to what foods and vegetable I can tolerate. Are you saying to move away from this?
I'm not a big fan of FODMAP because I feel that it's very, very limiting and it fries people's brains. I find that it is much more inclusive and helpful to help people to understand why they're experiencing fibromyalgia and IBS and what foods are not helpful and what foods can help. If someone is experiencing a lot of intolerance to fruits and vegetables, it's often because those fruits and vegetables are having a healing reaction. Every single fruit and vegetable you eat creates a healing reaction in the body. And sometimes that healing reaction can be uncomfortable. So if there's a lot of intolerance to certain vegetables, by all means, we can, avoid those vegetables in the shorter term with a view to help, with a view to it not being so bad, after a little while, once things settle down. what I would say is that if you're finding the FODMAP plan helps and that you do well on it, I'm not suggesting that you stop doing it or that you turn away. We must find those things that are helpful for us. But what I'm saying is that FODMAPs doesn't need to be employed to such an extent, because it can sort of scare people with the fruits and vegetables, putting them into a category of good and bad. Whereas actually all the fruits and vegetables are extremely helpful. It's just that some people might struggle with some of them in the shorter term.
Thanks, Rebecca. On one of your slides, it mentioned SIBO, S-I-B-O, and someone's asked, what is that?
So SIBO is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So that just means that we have an overgrowth of bacteria, usually Streptococcus. It is Streptococcus bacteria in the small intestine, which is unproductive bacteria in the small intestine, which creates gut problems. So when there's IBS, for example, there's very often small intestinal bacterial overgrowth alongside.
Sarah's asked, what variety of potatoes are the best to eat? And then also, she's also asked, it might be a daft question, there's never a daft question, Sarah, ever. How much celery do you need to make up the 400 mils? Yeah,
so potatoes, any variety of potatoes, any varieties of potatoes that you like, you can eat. They're all amazing. Okay. And to make 400 mils of celery juice, which is the medicinal dose, you really need, about one large bunch of celery or a little bit more. It depends on the size of the celery bunch. And you need a good juicer.
That's good. Thank you. Thank you, Sarah.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Sarah's also put, thank you so much, so helpful, and we'll implement these things.
Great.
When you mentioned coffee being bad, does that relate to both caffeinated and decaffeinated coffee?
Yeah, when I say coffee is bad, it's unhelpful. It's extremely unhelpful because it's very, very hard on the nervous system. It's a neurotoxin, which means it's toxic to the nervous system. It's also very abrasive, corrosive to the liver because it's a poison that the liver has to process. So decaf coffee has less caffeine in it, but it doesn't have no caffeine. So for people who are very sensitive, that decaf can be accumulative. So for me, for example, I'm very, very sensitive to caffeine. So if I have a decaf coffee 2 or 3 days in a row, I can really feel the effects of that building in my system. I mean, a decaf coffee I can still feel on the day, but when I have it 2 or 3 days in a row, I'm sunk. So then I know how strong an effect it's actually having. So it's not great. It's not great. It's also very, very acidic, so if you're trying to heal the body, then you don't really want to be having these acidic things, or you only want to be having them on the one-off here and there.
Okay. Another great question from Sarah. Not too many questions at all, Sarah. They're fantastic. What are the best foods to assist with the perimenopause symptoms?
Well, we have to look more broadly at what's going on with that person. Perimenopause is a broad umbrella. Generally, if somebody is experiencing a lot of perimenopausal symptoms, there's something else going on. Very often viral load and an overburdened liver. So it would require looking a little bit deeper. But in general, you want to be cutting back on your fat intake to really give the liver a break, and eating substantially more fruits and vegetables, and celery juice will really help with that.
Fabulous. Another question here: is all caffeine bad, including tea?
Yeah, all these caffeine questions.
Yeah, it's how we get through the day. It's how we get through the day.
Well, absolutely. You see how addicted we are to caffeine. It's very, very hard to function without it in the world that we're living in. So it's a big problem. So all caffeine is not helpful in the sense that it's very, very stimulating to the nervous system when we're already overstimulated much of the time. So, as best we can, we want to be destimulating. And if you are suffering with any kind of condition or symptoms, this is a problem because that adrenaline the caffeine produces a lot of adrenaline in the body, and that adrenaline feeds viruses and bacteria. And that adrenaline is also very, very exhausting for the adrenal glands. When the adrenal glands are exhausted, the hormonal system becomes exhausted. So you have this whole cycle that goes on when there's a lot of caffeine. It's destructive to the endocrine system.
Wow. One more question. I suffer from a lot of cold sores. I'm now taking tablets a day because they're very aggressive. Is there anything you could recommend that I could eat or drink daily that would probably help with this?
Absolutely. So celery juice is key, absolutely key. And taking a lysine supplement, a good quality lysine supplement daily is also very, very helpful. So lysine is highly antiviral. It will help to fight off the herpes virus. You know, things like propolis can be very helpful. And then lots of fruits and vegetables, lots of potatoes, because they're very high, naturally high in lysine. Those would be the main things. Yeah.
Oh, Richard's just done a little cheeky one, I'm afraid, Rebecca.
Yeah,
but where do chocolate bars sit within this? Well
yeah,
done, Richard.
so chocolate,
even the fruit and nut ones, maybe, because I have them instead.
Yeah, I love that. Even the fruit and nut ones.
Love it. Even the fruit and nut, maybe.
Yeah, even the fruit and nut ones. So chocolate's still got a lot of caffeine in it. So, you know, the darker the chocolate, the more the caffeine. So again, if you're very sensitive, then you know, it's very hard on the nervous system. It's a toxin to the nervous system. It's stimulating. And then the milk chocolate, also not very helpful because it's full of milk and sugar. So this is not great either. So I would say, you know, if you're going to eat chocolate, eat it in very small amounts and eat very good quality chocolate with no refined sugar, for example, and see it as a treat rather than an everyday thing. If you're pregnant, stay off chocolate altogether, and certainly stay off caffeine, any kind of tea or coffee.
Wow.
Or breastfeeding. Yeah.
Thank you so much for the community for all those questions. Thank you ever so much. And Rebecca, what an amazing font of knowledge. I could listen to you for hours and days, honestly. Thank you so very much. And thanks for everyone to join. And this will then be put up on the Frola Community YouTube channel. Thanks again for everybody who came, and even more importantly, thank you, Rebecca, for your fantastic information.
Such a pleasure, and lovely to be here. Thank you, Susanna.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you all very much, and have a great evening. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Rebecca.
You're welcome, Susanna. Thank